What happens when a billionaire laughs at a cleaning lady's son, only for the boy to shut down an entire boardroom with 9 different languages? Angela Porter never planned to bring her son to the office that night, but sometimes life doesn't leave you with many options. At 42, she had become accustomed to making difficult choices, to finding ways to hold her world together when it felt like everything around her was built to keep her small. That evening in downtown Dallas, she was on her knees with a rag and bucket, scrubbing a stubborn stain on a glass conference table while a group of men in suits argued over numbers. Her 13-year-old son, Caleb, sat quietly in the corner with a notebook balanced on his knees. The executives hardly noticed him when they walked in earlier. To them, he was just the cleaning lady's kid, tagging along because his mother couldn't afford a babysitter. But Angela saw every flicker of his eyes, the way he absorbed every word flying across that boardroom. Caleb wasn't doodling in that notebook. He was writing down words in Spanish and then translating them into French. It was his own game, something he did when bored, though he never liked to call it a game. For him, languages weren't a pastime. They were a lifeline. Angela straightened her back for a moment, stretching her aching shoulders as her eyes wandered to the men seated around the polished table. They were hosting a guest, Omar Al-Karim, a man whose wealth stretched across continents. The way the executives leaned forward when he spoke told her everything. They needed him more than he needed them. Angela had been cleaning offices for nearly 20 years. She'd seen deals fall apart, voices raised, champagne popped when contracts were signed. But this night felt different. The suits were sharper, the tension thicker. She tried to move silently, but no matter how careful she was, she could feel the weight of being the invisible one in the room. "Angela," one of the men said absent-mindedly as she wiped fingerprints from the glass door. "Could you come back later? We've got a delicate discussion going on." She forced a polite smile. "I'll stay out of the way. Won't take long." Caleb shifted in his seat, sensing the dismissiveness behind the man's voice, but Angela gave him a small shake of the head. "Don't start." She taught him to pick his battles, and usually he listened. The meeting stretched on. Voices rose and fell. Numbers were scribbled on whiteboards, contracts slid across the table. Angela felt the familiar ache of being invisible, even as she wiped right beside them. She was the shadow in the room, necessary yet unseen. But Caleb wasn't unseen. Not to everyone. At one point, one of the younger executives, his tie loosened and patience thin, glanced toward the boy in the corner. "So, what's the kid doing here?" His tone wasn't cruel, just careless, but it cut through Angela like glass. Before she could answer, Caleb lifted his eyes from the notebook. "I'm just listening," he said quietly. The men chuckled. Omar leaned back in his chair, his deep voice filling the room. "Listening? At 13, I was too busy trying to sneak out of class. You must be bored to death." Caleb hesitated, then added, "Not really. I understand most of it." The room broke into laughter. "Oh yeah?" The younger executive smirked. "And what exactly do you understand, kid?" Caleb's fingers tightened around his pen. He swallowed hard, but didn't look away. "I speak 9 languages." Angela froze. She wanted to grab his hand, hush him, keep him from being swallowed by their laughter, but the words were out, hanging in the air like a challenge. The suits erupted. Even Omar chuckled, shaking his head. "9 languages?" he repeated, amused. "You must mean 9 video games." Caleb's ears burned, but he didn't flinch. "No," he said firmly. "Languages." Angela's heart pounded in her chest. She had seen this look in her son before, the mixture of fear and defiance. It was the same look he had when kids at school mocked him for reading dictionaries during lunch. She prayed silently he wouldn't embarrass himself further, but a part of her, the mother who had watched him study late into the night, wanted to see where this would go. But none of them, not even Angela, could have imagined what would happen next. The laughter in the room carried weight. It wasn't cruel in the sharpest sense, but it had that edge of superiority that made it sting. Angela could feel her cheeks warm, as though their chuckles weren't just at her son, but at her too. She kept wiping the glass door, her cloth moving in circles that grew tighter and tighter, hoping Caleb wouldn't push back. But Caleb was different from other kids. He didn't shrink under attention. He never had. The younger executive leaned forward with a grin, resting his chin in his hand. "All right then, Caleb, 9 languages, huh? Which ones? Don't tell me Pig Latin counts." Angela opened her mouth, ready to intervene, but Caleb spoke first. English, Spanish, French, Mandarin, Arabic, Russian, German, Italian, and Portuguese. His voice trembled at the start, but steadied as he listed them. Omar's thick brows rose, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. That's impressive for a boy your age, if it were true. But 9 come now. The room filled with small laughs again, muffled coughs to hide smirks. Angela felt each sound like a jab to her ribs. She wished she could make him stop, pull him out of the spotlight, but Caleb sat taller, his dark eyes locked on Omar. Say something then, another executive teased. Come on, prove it. Angela finally spoke up. He doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. Her voice carried more steel than she intended, but she didn't care. Caleb was her son, not some circus act. Omar's gaze softened for a split second as he looked at her, then turned back to Caleb. She's right. You don't need to, he said, though his tone still carried amusement. But if you can, even just a phrase or two, well, that would be remarkable. Caleb glanced at his mother. She shook her head gently, trying to protect him from humiliation. But Caleb had already decided. ¿Cómo está su noche? He said suddenly, his Spanish smooth, his accent sharp and quick. The younger executive blinked, then chuckled again. Okay, Spanish. Half the kids in Texas can manage that. Without missing a beat, Caleb switched. Je pense que vous ne me croyez pas, mais je vais continuer quand même. The room quieted slightly. His French was clear, each syllable precise. Before anyone could react, Caleb's voice shifted again, this time rolling in tones that none of them could follow. Wan Shang Hao, Hangao Sing Jiandao Nimen. Mandarin flowed from his mouth, the characters shaped cleanly in the air. Angela's cloth stilled against the glass. She wasn't surprised, not really. She'd heard him practice enough at home, but hearing it land in this space among men who thought so little of him made her chest tighten. The executives exchanged glances. Some leaned back, blinking. Omar tilted his head, his smirk fading into something closer to curiosity. Then Caleb looked directly at him and spoke in Arabic. Minasehel and Tadhak, lakin lace minasehel and tufham. It's easy to laugh, but it's not easy to understand. The air in the room shifted. Omar straightened in his chair, his expression unreadable now. Angela felt her knees weaken, though she stood still, not daring to move. One of the executives broke the silence with an awkward laugh. That's enough, right? Kid's got a few tricks. His tone carried the thinness of someone trying to regain control of a room that no longer belonged to him. But Caleb wasn't finished. Russian tumbled out of his mouth next, thick and confident, followed by German clipped with precision, then the soft flow of Italian. He ended with Portuguese, his voice steady, almost casual, as if this weren't extraordinary at all. By the time he stopped, the room had gone silent again, truly silent. Angela realized she was holding her breath. She let it out slowly, her chest aching. Omar leaned forward, elbows on the table, his eyes fixed on Caleb. His laughter was gone. His smile, too. What replaced them was harder to read. Part amazement, part disbelief, part something else Angela couldn't quite name. Who taught you? Omar finally asked. No one, Caleb replied. Books, online videos, talking to people when I could. I like learning. The executives looked at one another, their amusement completely drained now. Angela could feel their shift, that sudden discomfort when arrogance collapses into shame. She wiped the glass door again, though her hand shook. A tear burned in her eye, but she blinked it away. Pride and fear battled inside her chest. Pride in her son's brilliance. Fear of what this revelation might bring. But this was only the beginning of the surprise, because Omar wasn't done questioning him yet. For a moment, no one moved. The silence after Caleb's last word stretched across the conference room like a cord pulled tight. Even the sound of Angela's rag rubbing against the glass seemed too loud. Caleb sat there, small against the backdrop of gleaming leather chairs and shining suits. But somehow, he carried the room now. Omar was the first to break the stillness. He leaned back in his chair, his hand brushing over his beard as his eyes stayed locked on the boy. 9 languages, he repeated softly, but this time there was no hint of laughter in his tone. And you're only 13? Yes, sir. Caleb's voice was steady, though Angela could see the way his fingers tapped nervously against the notebook in his lap. Angela wanted to step in, to end it, to protect him from more questions. But something in Omar's face told her this wasn't mockery anymore. It was something deeper. One of the executives finally spoke, his voice tight. It's impressive, but let's be honest here. Anyone can memorize a few phrases. It doesn't mean he's fluent. Caleb looked at him. Do you want me to translate your notes on the whiteboard? Or maybe the Arabic portion of your contract draft? His words were calm, direct, without arrogance. The man shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the board where terms and numbers sprawled in English and shorthand. That's not necessary, but Omar interrupted, his tone sharp. Yes, let him. Angela's stomach clenched. She wanted to protest, but Caleb was already standing, his small frame crossing the room toward the whiteboard. He picked up a marker with a confidence that startled her. He scanned the writing quickly, then spoke in Arabic, translating line by line into flawless English. His accent carried the weight of practice, not mimicry. Angela's throat tightened. She remembered nights when Caleb stayed up with his old laptop, the glow of the screen lighting his face as he repeated words over and over, sometimes whispering in the dark so he wouldn't wake her. She had scolded him once, worried it would ruin his health, but he only smiled and said, "It's fun, Mom." Now here he was, proving it to men who never would have believed him otherwise. The executives stared, their expressions shifting from skepticism to shock. The man who had doubted him earlier rubbed his forehead, as if struggling to process what he was seeing. Omar clapped his hands once, a sharp sound that made Caleb pause. Enough, he said firmly. I believe him. Angela's breath left her in a rush, part relief, part disbelief. Omar rose from his chair, walking slowly toward Caleb. The air in the room felt charged, every pair of eyes following his steps. He stopped in front of the boy, studying him closely. You remind me of someone I once knew, Omar said finally. His voice was quieter now, more personal. A boy in my village. He learned English before anyone else, from old tapes. Everyone laughed at him, said it was a waste of time. Years later, he was the one leading companies, traveling the world. No one laughed then. Caleb's lips parted slightly, but he didn't speak. Angela felt her heart swell and ache at the same time. She had always known her son was extraordinary, but hearing someone like Omar recognize it gave that truth a weight she never could. Still, the pride was laced with fear. She wiped her hands on the rag, her mind racing. People like Omar didn't just notice talent, they wanted to use it. I have to ask you, Omar continued, his voice soft but insistent. Why languages? Most children your age are chasing games, chasing distractions. Why this? Caleb hesitated. His eyes flicked toward his mother, then back to Omar. Because every language is like a key, and if you have enough keys, you can open almost any door. The words hung in the air, simple yet powerful. Angela pressed her lips together, trying to hold back tears. That was her son, seeing the world not as it was, but as it could be. The executives sat in stunned silence. Even the younger one, who had been so quick to laugh, avoided meeting Caleb's eyes now. Omar nodded slowly, as if the boy had confirmed something he already suspected. He turned toward the table of men. Gentlemen, I came here to discuss your contracts, but at this moment, I find myself more interested in this boy. Angela stiffened, her rag dropping into the bucket of water with a splash. She didn't like the sound of that. Don't, she said, her voice trembling but firm. He's just a child. Omar looked at her, his expression unreadable. No, he said softly. He is not just anything. Angela's heart pounded, her instincts screaming at her to protect her son. But before she could speak again, one of the executives leaned forward, his skepticism flaring once more, and his words would test everything Caleb had just proven. The tension snapped back like a rubber band when one of the executives cleared his throat. His name was Douglas Keene, a man with silver hair and a voice polished from decades of boardrooms. He leaned back in his chair, his expensive watch catching the light as he waved a dismissive hand. Let's not get carried away, Keene said flatly. Yes, the boy can memorize. Yes, he can mimic. But fluency, true understanding, that takes years of study with the best tutors money can buy. Forgive me if I don't believe he mastered 9 languages by himself. Angela bristled. She wanted to snap at him, tell him how many nights she had walked into their tiny apartment to find Caleb asleep over books, headphones still in his ears. But before she could, Caleb spoke. I didn't memorize. I live it every day. Keen smirked, as if the words confirmed his belief that this was all childish bravado. Live it? Tell me, son, how exactly do you live Russian in a Dallas apartment complex? Caleb's shoulders stiffened, but he didn't back down. By reading Russian newspapers online, by messaging people in chat rooms, by listening to recordings until the words stopped sounding foreign. Another executive chuckled under his breath. Chat rooms. Hardly the education system at work. Omar raised a hand, silencing them with a glance. His eyes never left Caleb. Translate this for me, he said in Arabic, his voice slow and deliberate. He recited a proverb, one that Angela couldn't understand, but could feel carried weight. Without hesitation, Caleb replied, "A wise man's silence is worth more than a fool's speech." Angela's hands trembled at her side. The speed, the accuracy, this wasn't a trick. This was real. The room went silent again. Omar's gaze softened for the first time that evening. Flawless, he whispered, but Keen wasn't done. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. So he can parrot back what he hears. That's a party trick. Does he understand culture, idioms, humor, real depth? Angela wanted to scream at the man, but Caleb simply smiled faintly, then switched to German. His words came crisp, precise, and when he reached the punchline of a joke, his timing was perfect. Even Angela, who didn't understand a word, could feel it was a joke by the way his tone shifted. Omar let out a genuine laugh, startling the room. You see, humor, timing, nuance. Do not mistake what you've just heard. Angela's chest tightened. For the first time in years, someone with real power defended her son, not out of pity, but out of respect. Keen exhaled loudly, clearly irritated. Even if he's talented, so what? What future is there for him? He's the son of a cleaning lady. He'll fade into the background, just like his mother. Angela's rag slipped from her hand. Her throat burned with shame and fury. She had endured humiliation countless times in these offices, but to have her child dragged into it, it was unbearable. Before she could speak, Omar's hand slammed against the table. The sharp sound made everyone flinch. Enough! His voice thundered in the room. Do you not see? This boy is worth more than every word you've spoken tonight. Angela's breath caught. She wasn't used to anyone standing up for her, let alone for Caleb. Omar turned to her now, his tone gentler. You've raised him well. I can see the discipline, the hungers. That does not come from tutors or privilege. That comes from sacrifice. Angela swallowed hard, unsure what to say. She wasn't used to recognition. Her whole life, people barely noticed her, and when they did, it was only to complain or dismiss. Tell me, Omar asked, his voice steady. How did you manage this? Angela hesitated. Her instinct was to stay small, to deflect, but when she saw Caleb's face, waiting, hopeful, she took a shaky breath. I didn't. He did. All I did was keep the lights on, keep the fridge full when I could, and pray he'd have a better chance than I ever did. For a moment, Omar simply looked at her. Then he nodded slowly. Sometimes the greatest gift a parent can give is the chance for a child to outgrow them. Angela's eyes stung. She turned away, wiping at her face with the back of her hand, not wanting them to see her tears. The younger executive shifted uncomfortably. So what now? He muttered. Are we supposed to stop this meeting to celebrate a kid who likes dictionaries? Angela's head snapped back toward him, but Omar spoke first. No, he said firmly. We stopped this meeting because what we've just witnessed is more important than your numbers on a page. The room went still again. Angela could barely believe what she was hearing. But the disbelief would not last long, because Keen wasn't ready to let go of his pride, and his next words would cut deep. Douglas Keen wasn't a man who liked losing control. His reputation in Dallas boardrooms had been built on dominance, on out-talking, outsmarting, and out-intimidating anyone who threatened his position. Watching a 13-year-old boy take the oxygen out of the room infuriated him. He straightened in his chair, his jaw tight, his tone sharper than before. Let me get this straight, he said, his words slow and deliberate. We're supposed to take business advice from a boy who hasn't even finished middle school? We're supposed to be impressed because he can spit back sentences he memorized from YouTube? Angela's face burned. She opened her mouth, but Caleb beat her to it. I didn't memorize from YouTube, Caleb said, his voice even. I learned by practicing every day. I use apps, I talk to people online, I read newspapers in other languages. I don't just say the words, I understand them. Keen let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. Kid, you don't even know what you don't know. Languages aren't just about words. They're about history, culture, context. You're not old enough to understand any of that. Angela clenched her rag so tightly her knuckles whitened. She had endured years of belittlement from men like Keen, but hearing him talk down to her son was a different kind of pain. Omar turned toward Keen slowly, his dark eyes narrowing. Careful, he warned, his voice low. Dismissing him doesn't make him smaller. It makes you smaller. But Keen wasn't ready to back down. He gestured toward Caleb. Fine. If he's so fluent, let's test him. Right here, right now. No warm-ups, no rehearsed phrases. The other executives shifted uncomfortably. None of them wanted to be on Keen's side, but none dared to challenge him either. Angela's stomach twisted. She wanted to tell Caleb to sit down, to let it go, to protect him from being cornered like this. But when she looked at her son, she saw something steady in his eyes. A calm defiance that reminded her of her younger brother, who used to debate with teachers until they gave up. All right, Caleb said simply. Keen raised an eyebrow. Oh, confident, are we? Let's see. Translate this. He launched into rapid French, his accent stiff, but his words clear enough. Caleb waited until Keen finished, then replied smoothly in English. You said, if you think speaking a few sentences makes you a genius, you're mistaken. The room grew quiet. Keen's smirk faltered, but he recovered quickly. Lucky guess. Anyone could have caught that. Omar's mouth twitched, the closest he had come to a smile since the tension began. Try harder, Douglas. Keen switched gears, firing off a Russian phrase. His voice stumbled over the harsh consonants, but his meaning was clear. Children should stay silent when grown men are working. Caleb's response came sharp, confident. And grown men should be careful when they underestimate children. A ripple moved through the room. Even the executives who had stayed silent earlier couldn't help but glance at one another. Angela's heart thudded in her chest. She wanted to cheer, to hug her son, but she stood still, her pride hidden behind trembling hands. Keen's face reddened. Clever. But anyone can memorize proverbs, triculture, humor. Something deeper. Caleb took a breath. Then in German he delivered a short anecdote, weaving in a pun that made Omar laugh aloud. Even Angela, who didn't understand a word, could tell by the timing that it was a joke. Caleb grinned shyly afterward, his shoulders easing. Keen slammed his palm against the table. Enough games. This is absurd. He's a child. A child. You people are treating him like a prodigy. Angela stepped forward now, unable to stay silent. Because he is one. Her voice shook, but her words cut through the air. Keen turned on her, his lip curling. With respect, Miss Porter, you scrub floors for a living. Let's not pretend you're qualified to decide what's extraordinary. The words hit Angela like a punch. She felt her face flush, shame colliding with fury. But before she could respond, Omar's voice cut through the room like steel. Watch your tongue, he said, his accent sharpening with anger. The work she does puts food in your restaurants, cleans your offices, keeps your meetings from smelling like filth. Without her, you'd be sitting in your own trash. Do not insult her. The silence that followed was heavy. Angela's throat tightened as tears pricked her eyes. For the first time in her life, someone had defended her in front of men who thought themselves untouchable. Keen leaned back, rattled but unwilling to show defeat. His eyes darted toward the other executives, searching for backup, but they avoided his gaze. Omar turned back to Caleb, his expression softening. You've shown more wisdom tonight than most men twice your age, he said, then with a glance at Angela. And that comes from more than talent. It comes from sacrifice. Angela swallowed hard. Her son had fought back, yes, but Omar's words reminded her that behind every fight was the quiet, unseen struggle of survival. But the night wasn't finished yet, because Omar's next question would take the conversation to a place no one in that room expected. For a moment, the room felt frozen. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning and Caleb's steady breathing. Omar turned his attention away from Keen and focused entirely on Angela. His eyes softened, and for the first time that evening, the intimidating presence of the billionaire seemed to ease. "I want to know something," Omar said, his voice calm but insistent. "How does a boy like this, without tutors, without travel, without access to the best schools, how does he exist? How did you raise him?" Angela froze. She wasn't used to being asked questions in these rooms. Usually she was told to hurry up, to come back later, to move her bucket out of the way. Now every pair of eyes, even those of the men who had mocked her moments ago, turned toward her. Her throat tightened. "I didn't," she whispered, then louder. I didn't do it alone. He did it himself." She gestured toward Caleb, who sat quietly, his notebook still resting on his knees. "All I did was work, keep the lights on, keep food on the table. That was my part." Omar tilted his head. "And that part, Miss Porter, is the hardest." Angela blinked, tears stinging her eyes. She wasn't used to recognition. For years, she'd scrubbed toilets, wiped down glass doors, carried heavy bags of trash down endless hallways, and not once had anyone thanked her. Now, this man, who could buy and sell everything in that building, was telling her she mattered. Caleb glanced at her, his small voice breaking the silence. "Mom, you did more than that. You kept the Wi-Fi on when we didn't have enough for groceries. You checked out dictionaries from the library for me. You made me write down 10 new words a day, even when I was tired. You didn't just keep the lights on, you lit the fire." Angela covered her mouth with her hand, overcome. She had no idea he noticed, let alone remembered. The executives sat uneasily. They weren't used to emotion in their boardrooms. Contracts, profits, deals, they understood those. But this, the raw truth of sacrifice, made them fidget in their chairs. Omar leaned forward. Discipline, hunger, sacrifice. These are the things that create brilliance, not privilege, not money. You've done what many of the richest families in the world cannot. You raised a boy who sees beyond himself. Angela wiped her cheek quickly, embarrassed to be crying. "I just wanted him to have choices I never did." Omar nodded. "And he will. Mark my words." He turned back to Caleb. "Tell me something, boy. What do you want to do with all this knowledge? 9 languages. That's more than most diplomats I know. What's your dream?" Caleb hesitated, his eyes dropping to his notebook. He fidgeted with the pen in his hand, then looked up. "I want to travel. I want to see the places where these languages come from. I want to help people who can't speak for themselves. If I can talk to anyone, maybe I can make them listen." Angela felt her chest swell with pride and ache at the same time. She had raised him to dream big, but hearing it out loud, in front of powerful men, made her realize how fragile those dreams were. Omar studied him, his face unreadable. Then he spoke softly. "Do you know what you remind me of? You remind me of myself. I was a boy in Sharjah with nothing but cassette tapes of English lessons. Everyone laughed when I practiced in the streets. But one day, those tapes bought me my first deal. The language that embarrassed me became the language that fed me." Caleb's eyes widened. For the first time, he saw Omar not as a towering figure in a tailored suit, but as a man who had once been underestimated too. Keen let out a snort, breaking the spell. "Are we really doing this? Trading bedtime stories in the middle of a business meeting?" Omar's gaze snapped to him, sharp as a blade. "Yes, Douglas, because this boy's story is more valuable than your numbers." Angela could see the humiliation on Keen's face, but for once she didn't care. Omar turned back to Caleb. "What you've done already is extraordinary. But the question is, what happens next? How will you use it?" Caleb swallowed hard. "I don't know. I just know I can't waste it." The boy's words lingered in the air. Even the executives, uncomfortable as they were, seemed unable to deny the truth of them. Angela exhaled shakily, realizing something had shifted. For years, she had walked into rooms like this invisible. Tonight, her son had made her visible. But the shift wasn't over yet, because Omar's next move would leave everyone wondering what kind of future Caleb and Angela might step into after this night. The air in the room had changed completely. What started as a meeting about numbers and contracts had turned into something no one could have predicted. Angela stood near the glass wall, still clutching her rag, but she no longer felt invisible. Her son had changed that. Omar stepped closer to Caleb, studying him with an expression that carried both admiration and calculation. "You have a gift," he said firmly, "not just for language, but for holding a room. Do you know how rare that is?" Caleb shifted in his chair, uncomfortable under the weight of so many eyes. "I don't know if it's a gift. I like learning. I like understanding people." "That is the gift," Omar replied. He turned, sweeping his gaze across the executives who still sat frozen. "Gentlemen, we spend millions hiring translators, consultants, negotiators. And here sits a boy who has taught himself to do what entire teams of professionals cannot. And you laughed at him." The silence that followed was heavy, almost punishing. Keen's face had gone pale, and the other men looked away, unable to meet Angela's eyes. Omar crouched slightly so he was eye level with Caleb. "One day, you'll decide where this takes you. Maybe politics, maybe business, maybe diplomacy. But promise me something." Caleb's brow furrowed. "What? Promise me you won't let small men with small minds convince you you're small too." Angela swallowed hard, her throat thick with emotion. She had wanted to say those very words to her son 1,000 times, but hearing them now, in this place, gave them a power she couldn't match. "I promise," Caleb said softly. Omar smiled faintly, then straightened. He looked back at Angela. "You've done more than raise a son. You've raised a force. Do not let anyone, including yourself, forget that." Angela's eyes filled, but she blinked quickly, refusing to let tears fall in front of these men. Instead, she squared her shoulders. "I won't." For the first time in years, she meant it. The executives shifted, restless, eager to return to business. But Omar wasn't finished. He placed his hand on the conference table and said, "This meeting is adjourned. We'll discuss contracts another day. Tonight, I learned something more valuable than your numbers. Brilliance is often hidden where people refuse to look." Angela's knees trembled. She wasn't used to moments like this, moments where the world seemed to flip upside down. She gathered her bucket, ready to slip out quietly, but Omar's voice stopped her. "Angela." She turned slowly. "If you ever doubt your worth again," he said, "remember this night. Remember who you raised." She nodded, her lips pressed tight to keep them from trembling. Caleb rose and walked to her side, sliding his hand into hers. His palm was sweaty, his fingers small, but his grip was steady. As they left the boardroom, Angela felt something she hadn't in years. Pride that reached deeper than exhaustion, deeper than shame. For once, she wasn't just the cleaning lady. She was the mother of a boy who had silenced a room full of powerful men. Down the hallway, away from the glass walls and leather chairs, Caleb whispered, "Did I embarrass you?" Angela stopped walking, turned to him, and crouched so they were face to face. "Embarrass me?" She shook her head fiercely. "Caleb, you made me the proudest woman alive tonight." He smiled, his eyes bright. Angela wrapped her arms around him, holding him tight, knowing that one day the world would try again to tell him he was small. But tonight, he had proof that he wasn't. And maybe, just maybe, she had proof too. Because the truth was simple. Greatness doesn't always come from wealth, status, or privilege. Sometimes it comes from a boy in the corner of a boardroom, holding a notebook, daring to speak up. And sometimes it comes from the mother who cleaned those rooms long enough to give him the chance. Life's lesson here is clear. Never measure someone's worth by their circumstances. Hidden brilliance is everywhere, waiting to be recognized. So the next time you are tempted to underestimate someone, stop and ask yourself, what if they're the one who changes everything? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, make sure you subscribe. More stories are waiting, and you won't want to miss them.